In 2000, Flash, a piece of software originally built for creating animation, received its own programming language, and people from all around the world began creating games. As the internet became more and more prevalent, it fell into place as the perfect host, providing a practically cost-free avenue through which to spread and publish these video games. As far as my childhood self knew, the internet only existed for two reasons: to look at Wikipedia and play Flash games. The first I only really used at school in the library when I had to. The second, though, was an endless wealth of entertainment, all with no cost, outside of the excruciating time it took to load these games via early 2000s Australian internet. For years and years, it never occurred to me to use the internet for anything else. I knew how to use Google, but all I searched for was Flash games. Why would I use the internet for anything else? As far as I was concerned, there was nothing on there that was better than unrestricted access to thousands of games. So I played a lot of them, and as such expanded my horizons and explored the newfound freedom that came with understanding a new platform better than my parents. That platform is starting to decay, however, with Adobe having officially killed Flash in the beginning of this year. So today, I'm going to go back and review some of the Flash games from my childhood that I have the fondest memories of. They're not technically all Flash games, maybe using Shockwave or something else, but I'm going to refer to them all as such for the sake of clarity. First of all, however, we have to cover the most prolific and influential of the Flash game websites. I think Newgrounds is the first site we all think of when looking back on Flash games, and rightly so. With forums, comment sections, profiles, and functional UX, it became the easiest of these sites to build a real community around. You'd find the same game on 30 different websites, but Newgrounds was usually where it was posted by the actual developer. When you were on Newgrounds, you didn't feel like one person clicking around a website, but a member of a community that was actively connecting people. It emphasized part of what made these games so special. They were made by other people, not massive studios like Nintendo or Activision. Personally though, I didn't engage in any of that community. I was certainly single-minded about just playing games. It didn't help that Newgrounds was pretty unreliable for me. A more robust user experience meant more complex design and structure, ramping up loading times and making just browsing not quite that feasible. At the center of the Newgrounds ecosystem stood the Behemoth, or what would become the Behemoth, co-created by Tom Fulp, who founded Newgrounds. Fulp, along with animator Dan Paladin, created Alien Hominid, a run-and-gun Flash game they uploaded to Newgrounds in 2002. Its art style has an immediate charm to it, and the animation only contributes to a cartoony, bombastic energy. You play as an alien whose UFO has crash-landed on Earth, with you now being hunted by the FBI. As you shoot your way out in all four directions, you'll have to combine jumping and ducking, occasionally coming up against a boss. It's a no-nonsense premise and moveset that gets you right into the meat of the action as soon as possible, which is a good choice for a Flash game. Your ray gun feels good to shoot and has a fast rate of fire, which does well to put the focus of your gameplay more on dodging than shooting. The melee attack is also efficient, substituting for the ray gun when in close proximity to an FBI agent, avoiding the problem of being so close to an enemy that your bullets go through them without damaging them. The jump feels underdeveloped though, as you reach the same height no matter how long you hold down the S key. This means that when jumping to avoid a projectile, you'll often end up on a higher section of the scenery, being shoved into an unexpected position and leading to confusion or unexpected deaths. This is only compounded on when you take the small screen real estate and slow movement speed into account. These elements all lead to sudden deaths that can feel unavoidable, making for a punishing experience overall. Your interpretation of that as a good or bad thing depends entirely on your personal preference though. It's not something I see as a positive, but it makes sense when considering this is a Flash game. You play these games in short bursts, regularly switching to a totally different game or a tab/window with something else to look at, like MSN Messenger or some LimeWire download. So as you come back for more, your knowledge of the game builds and you begin making progress. Alien Hominid is a largely enjoyable game with an endearing, scrappy quality that makes it hard to deny, and shines as a great example of how games can be designed to specifically excel as Flash games, thanks to the unique context that scene puts forth. A few years later, the same duo of Tom Fulp and Dan Paladin would release Dad and Me. Where Alien Hominid was borrowing from the SNES's Contra 3, Dad and Me heads to the other side of the rivalry to make a beat-em-up inspired by the Streets of Rage trilogy from the Sega Mega Drive. After getting dropped off by your dad, who happens to be the main character of an earlier game by the pair, the character you control proceeds to spend this nice sunny Saturday afternoon brutalizing all the other children in the neighborhood. It's simple beat-em-up fun, but the real brilliance stems from the art style and animation I've mentioned a couple times so far. The juxtaposing of cute, unassuming cartoons and bloody violence is really striking and conjures a very unique tone and humour, one that became really prevalent on the internet, and is still there today to an extent. It takes the idea of cartoon violence to its most extreme degree, making the experience of playing Dad and Me more fun than the sum of its parts. Because Dad and Me isn't all that enjoyable on the mechanical side. Many of the enemies run away from you, not directly engaging in combat, which leads to you chasing after them and stopping again and again because you think you're lined up with them when you really aren't. The people who do fight back can pretty easily lock you into getting hit over and over, with there being no maneuver to dodge as you get back up, feeling cheap and unfair. And the controls, in their attempt to be simple, instead lack clarity, with picking items up or punching them feeling arbitrary. But when you add in that unique approach to art and presentation, the times you do connect punches look great and in poor taste, but also entertaining. It all ends after about 20 minutes with a fight against a boss whose design is a bit shitty, playing into traits from racist caricatures. This length though makes sure to serve the platform well by being easy to finish in under half an hour. Together these two titles have amassed around 41 million plays on Newgrounds alone, leading the behemoth to begin creating a home console version of Alien Hominid. It ended up coming to PS2, Xbox and GameCube, with a Game Boy Advance release later down the road. It reviewed well and expanded on all the ideas of the original to create a fulfilling playthrough. Tom, being the founder of Newgrounds, had lots of free ad space to take advantage of, and I imagine users were pretty passionate about the game, as I'm sure it was cool to see these guys go from making little flash games for fun to releasing full console games with a physical release. With Alien Hominid's success, flash games had officially been proven as a viable way to build an audience around your game that could then translate to a profitable release. Now the chance of that happening was still low, but it could happen. The behemoth wouldn't just validate and legitimize the flash game space, but also console indie efforts. Their next game, Castle Crashers, became one of the staples of Xbox Live Arcade, along with other titles like Braid and Super Meat Boy. XBLA certainly had its problems, but it was a more robust space for indie games than the PS3 had at the time, and built a greater sense of community than WiiWare by having a better online experience. Since XBLA, indie games have found more and more success on consoles as Sony, Nintendo and Microsoft have continued to invest in creating a marketplace for them, and I think the behemoth played a not insignificant role in this shift of focus. The reason I'm touching on all this is to codify the influence and longevity that flash games have had over the industry. Flash games are seen as disposable. I myself cited a short runtime as an asset of these games, but that doesn't mean they haven't had an enormous positive effect on the industry. Newgrounds and the behemoth are proof that flash games are just as important as any other part of gaming history, and that importance was born out of the scene's existence outside of mainstream gaming. So we've seen one studio support itself for almost 20 years on a lineage of flash game foundations, but the behemoth isn't the only example. The Bloons series is an undeniable essential of flash gaming. Releasing in early 2007, Bloons has you going level by level trying to pop a certain amount of balloons with a limited number of darts. The whole game is controlled by simply clicking to confirm your angle and then clicking again to determine the power of your throw. It takes advantage of the precision that comes with a mouse and the casual nature of flash gaming, letting you rest your chin in your other hand or use it to alt-tab to something different. The levels start out predictably simple, letting you adjust to the feel of throwing and aiming darts. There's a pang of satisfaction that comes with the sound of heaps of balloons popping at once, with balloons being a great choice of target. The simple shape and primary colours makes them stand out, and the size makes it easy to pop groups of balloons but harder to single out smaller clusters, giving a variance in difficulty that responds to your previous throws. There's a steady introduction of new elements to keep the game fresh, like balloons that send out attacks to pop surrounding balloons, metal blocks that cordon off groups of balloons, bouncy surfaces, and freezing balloons. The levels tend to swing between actual challenges and these sort of gimmick levels, which play off the different reactions to different balloons to create fun little sequences. There is an overall lack of polish though. The previously mentioned bouncy blocks are inconsistent in how your darts will bounce off them, making levels that are based purely around this mechanic a bit arduous and deflating. Some ideas are incredibly underdeveloped and feel out of place, like the balloon that gives you control over a Pac-Man that can then eat other balloons. It barely ever shows up and feels utterly ham-fisted, being controlled by the arrow keys to feel even more out of place. The visuals are clearly very simple, but not in an all that charming way. With that said though, this absence of polish is not all bad. It seems like the devs threw all their ideas at the wall and didn't actually check to see if they stuck, but that just speaks to the experimental nature of Flash games. They were largely developed with no oversight, coming together in just a few months or in some cases a few days. So games like Bloons are filled with ideas good and bad, making them more personable and also forgivable, because there's no pressure if you don't like it. You've only invested 5 minutes of your time and there's a bevy of other games at your disposal. Ninja Kiwi, the devs of the Bloons series, would continue to pump out levels in the form of more Bloons and even more Bloons, adding over 100 levels to the Bloons 1 experience. Because they appear to have thrown every idea they had into this Bloons 1 trio, you're never really retreading ground, even across more than 150 levels. So these expansions, I suppose you could call them, are pretty much just what's said on the can. It's more Bloons. An interesting part of these games are the 5 player packs, each containing levels created by other players. These tend to be even more on the gimmicky side. They're certainly identifiable as levels created by players and not developers, though it's a bit of fun to dip into each one and see what's on offer. After hundreds of levels in just over a year, yes, that's how quickly they were coming out, Bloons 1 came to a close, and it wasn't until 2011 that Bloons 2 was released. This time around there's a more fleshed out structure, tackling worlds with themes that only vaguely bleed into the levels themselves. It's a clear sequel in every sense. The game looks better with level backgrounds and a clearer UI, with the exception of some formatting errors, and new mechanics show up right away, like layered balloons and moving balloons. It's still a lot of fun, though this larger scope can become a detriment to the playing experience. In making everything bigger, the amount of balloons has generally increased, leading to levels that can feel less precise and strategic. Some features like unlocking all the levels have been put behind a store. I don't begrudge the choice too much. I imagine making money off Flash games was a difficult task, but when that store no longer exists, these inclusions feel short-sighted. Bloons 2 is a respectable sequel that improves on the original in a whole lot of ways, continuing to be thoroughly entertaining. There would end up being 2 expansions based around spring and Christmas. Although these additions come with new ideas, they want to double down on that feeling of everything being bigger and more chaotic. Many of these levels become completely mindless, trying to throw way too many balloons and abilities on the screen, rendering the challenge and player's interest non-existent. The previous entries weren't gripping or mind-bending, but they required some thought to be put into strategy and placement of darts. But with that element essentially stripped from the experience, the desire to go on just isn't there. The Bloons series is overall a good time and an essential part of Flash gaming, but by this point I think people may know the series more for its spin-off. I'm of course talking about Bloons Tower Defense. I certainly played more of this series than the mainline Bloons games, and for good reason. A tower defense game has you defending against waves of units that you must defeat by placing your own units, called towers, on the battlefield. Letting too many enemies get past you results in a game over. Units will have different roles to play, giving you freedom in strategy and approach. Although I sunk a lot of hours into tower defense games, I never really played that many, sticking mostly to the aforementioned Bloons Tower Defense. Bloons TD1 is a play on this genre with a Bloons skin. The first game is a pretty clear first draft, having 1 map, 1 difficulty and 5 towers. The content that is here though is well thought out and implemented, providing a great deal of fun even today. The towers each serve a distinct purpose, but isn't limited to that purpose, like the bomb tower being essential for metal balloons, but still being effective at crowd control as well. This facilitates varying strategies and layouts, affording the player freedom over how the game plays out. The upgrades let the towers evolve and change over time to provide regular evolution in gameplay. The game does a fantastic job at communicating just the right amount of information. The set path the balloons have to follow gives you a guide to placing towers, making sure to create spaces for each tower to shine in their purpose, like having tight turns for the tack towers. The tips you get at the end of each round restrain from always telling you what balloons are coming up next, forcing you to try and infer what's to come from what each tower does and the associated price, as a more expensive tower is obviously meant to be bought in later rounds. This also means you get caught off guard, turning a game about planning into one about reacting, manufacturing intense moments of panic as you try to stop the coming onslaught of balloons. The balloons continue to be a great choice, keeping that clear visual communication from the main series, making the strength and speed easily identifiable by the colour of a balloon. You can take as long as you like between rounds, playing into that hop in and out rhythm that suits Flash games so well. Bloons TD1 is a really solid tower defense game, and the series would only build off this good start. Bloons TD2 expands on the ideas of the first game, having 8 towers and 3 difficulties that correspond with their own map. You now have 100 lives instead of 40, and towers are generally less expensive, though these details change on higher difficulties. This second game really only expands the breadth of the experience, not as much the depth. There's still only 2 upgrades for each tower. 2 of the new towers are actually hazards that slow down or pop a certain amount of balloons before vanishing, which does admittedly give you more room to save face should you be taken off guard. The one truly new tower more just fills in the gaps. The boomerang monkey is like an in-between of the dart monkey and cannon, not quite creating a new dynamic between towers but rather fleshing the established one out. That's where the expansion of ideas really stops though. The UI, graphics and upgrades are all the same, and the maps, even the new ones, all follow the same pattern of winding, sharp corners. Having years of experience with these games and the sequels, the simplicity makes Bloons TD2 feel a bit empty, but for a newcomer it provides a great opportunity. Tower defense games, and Bloons Tower Defense specifically, are accessible, unthreatening strategy games. I tend to avoid all types of strategy games because I'm just not very good at them, but I never felt that with tower defense games. There's no time pressure, no overwhelming amount of towers, and a very gradual build of challenge that eased me into a strategic experience. I would replay these games with different strategies and builds all the time, maybe focusing on just certain towers or not using any upgrades for example. There's not many moving parts in Bloons Tower Defense 1 and 2, but the ones that are there have markedly noticeable effects to fill them with hours and hours of entertainment. Bloons TD3 is where the series really steps up. 8 maps, each with 3 difficulties, 12 towers and hazards, new upgrades, and a more fleshed out presentation that is endearing without being sloppy. The series is now offering a fuller, more complete package that is tons of fun. The maps especially add layouts that flow more, with interesting nooks and crannies. The visual motifs run stronger as well, letting them and the experiences you have within them stand out. The new Monkey Beacon Tower is passive, extending the range and attack speed of any towers within its range. It encourages more thoughtful placement of towers and causes you to clump towers around choke points, making placement even more crucial to success. The best tactical addition though comes in the form of target priority. You can choose to have each tower focus on either the first or last balloons within their range. In the previous games, towers that had a more specific purpose, like the cannon, would miss out on serving that purpose as they defaulted to attacking whatever was first in the line. Nuances of tower control just weren't available to you, making the pool of strategy shallower. Here though, these 2 options deepen that pool and enhance the playing experience. This was the one I spent the most time playing as a Flash game, and it still stands up as a really great tower defense game. I still played Bloons TD4 as a Flash game, but I played it more as a mobile game, and it's pretty clear that it wants you to play it that way as well. It's still another step in the evolution of the series with new tracks, towers and upgrades, but much of the changes lay outside of the core gameplay experience. Premium tracks that have to be bought, persistent upgrades and different game modes and towers being unlocked as you rank up, don't just encourage you to keep coming back, but to keep coming back with some cash in hand. The UI is bubblier and larger overall to make navigation easier on a smaller screen, and the myriad of ads for mobile versions make it clear that you're not playing the game how they'd like you to. And that's really a shame because Bloons TD4 is fucking fantastic. It feels like a definitive realization of what they were going for in the original trilogy. Maps and towers are unique and well designed, each adding to the complexity of strategy and possibility of combinations. There are more target priorities to give you more control over a tower's role in the battlefield, with this addition alone improving the intrinsic fun of devising different layouts. Bloons TD4 represents a turning point, where Flash games were beginning to become mobile games, and if you look at most of the great Flash game sites you remember, you can see that that transformation has been completed. They're all built to be navigated with a touchscreen, and all the popular games are ports of mobile games. That isn't all a bad thing. The Bloons TD games that came after this one still seem to be really well received, but it's a bit sad to see this once exciting, cutting-edge side of gaming trail off in relevance. Although Bloons Tower Defense let me get in on strategy games, I never ventured that much further than that series. The one other I did play though was Gemcraft. Gemcraft follows the same core principles of other tower defense games, but with individual levels and a really unique way of attaining towers. You play as a wizard hoping to thwart the plans of an evil wizard to the east who's blighted the land with the hordes of monsters they've summoned. But none of that really matters, the plot is paper thin and not important, which I personally prefer. I've never played or wanted to play flash games for the narrative. With this individual level structure, there's a more adventurous feel, moving from battle to battle across the land. This is reinforced by a well thought out medieval fantasy aesthetic that's impressively executed, at times really creating a nice atmosphere when the battles quietly wage away. You don't place towers down as your offensive units, but gems on top of towers as your offensive units. Different coloured gems have different properties, with the creation of a gem consuming some mana, which will fill up over time and as you defeat oncoming enemies. Gems can be combined to consolidate power into fewer entities that each have stronger effects and damage, like poison damage or a slowing effect to their targets. This could provide you with a great amount of freedom in the execution of your strategy, but you're not given much of an indication about what gem will be created, so not a lot of forethought can be put into your approach. Maybe there is a consistent pattern for the different ranks and colours of gems, but it's never been one I've managed to discern. There's a flow of more thinking on your feet and changing layouts as you go, with waves of monsters always encroaching closer to the battlefield, and the ability to move gems between towers at no cost. I felt I always had to be doing something, I couldn't just sit back and wait around. Even if you have no chance of losing, seeing your mana at max and knowing that some is going to waste always encourages you to keep fortifying your defences. The levels scale nicely over time and typically hit a nice balance in longevity, allowing you to really build up your gems without running so long as to become a slog to get through. As you level up, you can upgrade things like max mana and such, and this aspect feels way more at home in a level-based game like Gemcraft, as it's been built from the ground up to have a bite-sized structure that builds to an overarching objective. Gemcraft has some really fun ideas that are implemented successfully enough to carve out a unique feel within the genre of tower defense games. What's so important about these games though, is the fact that they are tower defense games, a subgenre that was pioneered by flash game developers, showcasing the originality that this strange spot in gaming could conjure up. Tower defense wasn't the only original genre to emerge from flash gaming. There was also what I like to call upgrade games. These are games where you have a single objective, and you make progress towards that objective by buying upgrades, making incremental progress. The interaction with these games is typically pretty shallow, with all the fun really just coming from seeing the numbers go up. One of the most popular games within this lane is Learn to Fly. You play as a penguin who wishes to explore the skies, and you achieve that goal by buying upgrades to rockets, a glider, and a glacial ramp. You make run after run, trying to get as far as possible to accrue more money and complete challenges which volunteer even more money, with all of this funneling into one central action: upgrading. The game doesn't look anything special, but it strikes a wonderful harmony to position itself as a deeply impressive upgrade game and flash game. The first few runs are really uninteresting, you barely go anywhere and the money you make gets you the most basic upgrades. But the nature of this game's structure also means that the most boring parts of it are the shortest, as you'll quickly start making some progress, providing payoff for the first few minutes of boredom. Every run has some importance in the grand scheme of things, and when the grand scheme only stretches over an hour or two, it becomes a fun goal to realise, and one tailored to the bite-sized experience of flash games. As you fly further and further, the control you have over the penguin is emphasised, becoming essential to making the most of your runs. You can control the angle of the penguin in the air, letting you glide and bounce off the water to maximise distance and height, in the process making more money. Once you've managed to unlock the rocket, you can give yourself a boost, with that ability to control your angle playing a stronger role in your success. With such a simple gameplay loop, it could very easily fall into monotony, but Learn to Fly avoids that pitfall through the implementation of achievements. These reward you with money for meeting different requirements on a run, like speed, height, distance, and time, with the completion of these achievements unlocking larger ramps. They cause a shift of priority on a run-to-run basis, driving wedges of differentiation between runs that would otherwise feel identical and unremarkable. this incremental run-based structure coalesces with the achievements and tangible build of power from upgrades to fall into place as a near-perfect upgrade game. Your progress snowballs to consistently dole out those dopamine hits while letting you dip in and out for however you like, just keeping it open in another tab to chip away at on your own time. Learn to Fly is a thoroughly entertaining game in what was a newly emerging genre at the time, and still stands out as one of the strongest examples of an upgrade game. The upgrade games I personally have the best memories of are the Duck Life games. In the series, you train ducks to become champion racers in swimming, running, climbing and gliding. You earn money while training, which can be spent on feed to give your duck more energy, making progress by winning races and eventually the championship. I think my fondness for this series primarily comes from how reminiscent it is of the chow races from Sonic Adventure 2, which I spent a lot of time doing as a kid. But the series does a lot of other things adequately to be worth a playthrough on its own terms. The duck theme is cute and lovable enough to hold your attention, and the graphics aren't offensive or muddy, which is sufficient for a Flash game. Each of the 4 games in the series have mini-games for the different training styles. They're typically pretty fun and well suited for the short burst that you play them in. They also provide another prong of incremental growth. You don't just see your duck perform better as it levels up, but you perform better at the training minigames as your familiarity with them grows, making not just the higher stats rewarding, but also the method of heightening those stats. The biggest problem with the minigames is the lack of variety. They do have new elements in successive games, but the core of the minigames stay exactly the same for 3 different games, finally being switched up in Duck Life 4. You're given plenty of opportunities to show off the individual skills and the fruits of your labour, as there's typically a race for the different skills and then one final one that incorporates all of them at once, with this loop playing out a few times over the course of the game. This also means that you can't just train one skill relentlessly to make up for the low level of other skills, keeping the process of playing a well-rounded, constantly changing one. While the task of the current moment may be changing, you're shifting between a very limited amount of actions, so it could be said that you've really seen all these games have to offer on the gameplay front within 5 or 10 minutes, turning the hour or so it takes to finish one of these games into a rather dull one. As the series progressed, each sequel would usually try and have a unique twist on the formula, and while the attempt to make each title feel unique is admirable, the core never really evolves that much, leading each one to have much the same problems as its predecessor. It still manages to be a fun little series that's worth sinking some time into, setting itself apart from other upgrade games with gameplay that's a little more thought out. Much like tower defense games, upgrade games transitioned over to the mobile market, slotting into that ecosystem well, but it seems to me that they also ran side by side with clicker games, which doubled down on the raw feeling of progression, in the process sacrificing the already scant gameplay on offer to the player. The innovation and originality found in Flash gaming runs deep, but that doesn't mean they weren't also a wealth of referential, derivative Flash games out there either. With a newly emerging accessible tool for creating games coming into its own on the internet, which was largely free of corporate oversight in regards to intellectual property, the perfect storm was created for passionate expressions of fandom in the form of video games. You could make your very own Zelda game with little fear of legal repercussions, all while other people were actually playing and discussing your work. There were a lot of games in this vein, many of them atrociously bad but still respectable in their attempt. This wasn't an area of Flash games I particularly sought out on my own. If I wanted to play a Zelda game, I'd just go play the N64 or GameCube, so very few of these caught my interest. There were still a couple that I dipped into, however. The one that first comes to mind is Ultimate Flash Sonic. That main menu and music is burned into my brain, but that's about all I remember from it. The one other thing I can recall is the fact that I never played past the first act of the first zone. Like I've said, getting things to load and run on my internet was always a gamble, and it always gave up on me after Act 1, Zone 1. And this wasn't a one-off either. I was very into Sonic Adventure 2 Battle as a kid, so I was really keen on being able to play a 2D Sonic game, which caused me to check in and be disappointed very regularly by Ultimate Flash Sonic. So I'm technically reviewing a game from my childhood here, but it's one I barely ever actually played. In the past few years when I thought of this game, I always just assumed this was a weird Flash version of Sonic Advance, and that assumption wasn't totally inaccurate, because Ultimate Flash Sonic is really well made, feeling just like a 2D Sonic game, for better and for worse. You have 4 characters to choose from, with Amy and Shadow being unlockable, all of whom actually feel different to play. There are 2 zones with 2 acts and a boss fight each, comprised of unimaginative ice and grass themes that are admittedly pretty to look at. The music is super fun and bouncy throughout, as is typical for a Sonic game. The music and visuals may very well be assets taken from other Sonic games, but I don't begrudge that decision. The presentation is a large part of what makes this feel so official, so as long as the level design is interesting, then that's what matters as far as I'm concerned. Level design is where Ultimate Flash Sonic resembles a 2D Sonic game for the worse. I think 2D Sonic can be tons of fun. I adore the 2D levels of Sonic Generations. But 2D Sonic can also be frustrating, stilted and tiring, and Ultimate Flash Sonic definitely made me feel those things. Levels are peppered with springs that bounce you into spikes and enemies that come out of nowhere, punishing you for moving fast while also having slopes and boosts that force you to move fast. I mean, if you start moving right immediately on the first zone, you'll hit an enemy's explosive and die. Why? These levels exploit your ignorance towards them to feel unfair. This doesn't have to be a wholly negative thing. 2D Sonic games are meant to be replayed. Your first time on a level will probably be a bit miserable, but by the third or fourth go round, you're expertly dodging obstacles and figuring out how to access all these different paths, all while maintaining exhilarating speeds. But Ultimate Flash Sonic has lives, and once you get a game over, you're back at the first act of Zone 1. You can't just replay the act you're up to so you can get to the point where playing is actually fun, you have to fight against all the other levels again to get there. That's why I find Sonic Generations fun, because you can just play one level at a time, with the challenges encouraging the replayability that helps you find the fun. Ultimate Flash Sonic stumbles at all the hurdles of official 2D Sonic games, but also has one unique issue. The collision detection is real shoddy. I would regularly screech to a complete stop on inclines and loops, which then forced me to tangle with the lethargic process of regaining your speed and momentum. This plagues the whole game and only compounds with the other shortcomings to make the game pretty unpleasant to play. There's clearly been a lot of love put into Ultimate Flash Sonic, and it's probably the only Flash game I've played that could come close to passing for an officially licensed part of the series is based on, but the design and collision faux pas really stop this idea from reaching its full potential. It also doesn't help that the nostalgia I have for this game doesn't go any further than the title screen, so I don't have any lingering affection that would make me more forgiving of its drawbacks. Okay, so now that we're done with all that lame Sonic shit, let's play the true titan of Flash games based on existing properties. Lilo and Stitch Sandwich Style. A nail-biting dedication to a relatable human tragedy, trying to make a sandwich without putting any rotting food on it as it falls from the sky. Quiver in fear of the plunging fish carcasses and moldy boots, all while trying to construct a delicious lunch so you don't perish of starvation. With horrifyingly lifelike graphics and ominous haunting music, you'll be begging for salvation from this perverse, cutting-edge Flash game experience. While there are more derivative titles based explicitly on a series of games, there were also a few that instead took just a premise or central idea. The example I have the most experience with is Territory War. This takes the basis for the Worms games, with two teams being pitted against each other on a map, with you having to use the available tools and terrain to secure victory for your team. Territory War is such a mid-2000s-ass game, with copious amounts of stick figure violence and music by someone called Gorebastard. I adore it. There's a 10 mission campaign that has you fighting different sized teams on different maps. I really enjoyed revisiting this one. For like 10 minutes. There is no meat on these bones. The movement options are incredibly limited, maps are basic and flat, rarely allowing multiple unique battles to play out and instead sandwiching everyone together, and you only have 3 weapons, fitting the bare minimum requirements for long range, mid range and close range attacks. The AI swings wildly between complete incompetency and absurd precision to a laughable degree. It was honestly a blast seeing what utter shit I was not just putting up with, but actively enjoying when it came to Flash games as a kid. And I mean utter shit in an affectionate way. This is such a time capsule to that point in time that it's hard not to love. I think I played this so much for 3 reasons. 1, I'd never played a Worms game. As far as I knew, Territory War invented this really cool idea. I also imagine its simplicity was probably an asset in winning me over back then. With no time limit on turns and only a few offensive options, the ideal choice for each situation was usually pretty obvious, so success and a feeling of accomplishment was easily obtained. 2, there was multiplayer. You could play against a friend, and that was not too common in Flash games, so it was an easy, fun thing to do if a friend was over. 3, and this is probably my favourite thing about this game, is the comically gratuitous violence when you get a headshot. And the general edgy attitude of the game. I wasn't allowed to play violent games as a kid, but I was allowed to play Flash games, and my parents had no idea what Flash games I was playing, so my dumb little act of rebellion when I was younger was playing Territory War and only trying to get headshots. Territory War was a part of a larger effort within the mid to late 2000s to try really hard to make stick figures seem badass and cool. You'd find heaps of Flash games and animations based around stick figures shooting or fighting in a quote-unquote cool way, coded in lots of blood and often an overly serious, try-hard plot. So let's take a look at some of these games. A very tame example is Defend Your Castle. In Defend Your Castle, you defend your castle. Yep, that's pretty much it. There's not much to this game. It does make unique use of the mouse by having you throw enemies into the air so they die from the fall. You get an opportunity to buy any repairs or add some upgrades between levels, though it never held my interest long enough to see how those upgrades make a difference. The control scheme is genuinely novel, but it also just hurts after a while, so there's going to be a built-in limit on how much you can take. This doesn't quite have that self-serious tone I mentioned, but shows glimpses into how this strange stickman obsession would develop. The description for this next game comes from a website dedicated to it, and it reads as such. Electric Man 2 is a fighting game geared towards teens, where you are a contestant and your role is to fight to achieve an ultimate goal of becoming the powerful Stickman champion. You have to fight different fighters in the tournament until the end, where you fight the undefeated champion to take the title. You have to battle against different hosts of opponents on the tournament, where you can combine martial arts, superhuman powers and street fighting to tackle your opponents. Also, you can make use of some great fighting abilities like moving in slow motion and using special bullet time moves. However, in order to earn your title of the powerful Stickman fighter, you have to finally fight and beat the current champion who has never been beaten on the previous fights. Fantastic! You get an opportunity to customize your character a bit, after which you get a small tutorial. You have 3 types of attacks, which execute different combos or moves depending on if you're stationary or not, with a dodge as well. The game plays like a Flash animation come to life with the acrobatic movement and fighting, and a slow motion effect is of course here too. There's not really any actual combos. Chaining together different attacks is unviable, as pretty much every one of them knocks the recipient to the ground. When you get into the actual fights, that makes a lot more sense, as you're usually outnumbered and you'll have to be constantly switching targets while the others are out of commission for a few seconds. I specifically remember thinking that all the different groups of people you fight were the coolest thing ever, though today I more find them cute for how hard they're trying to be cool, with the gas masks and spikes and such. Much of what I'm saying here is based off memory, because getting this game to run properly is an impossible task it seems. I encountered some hilarious bugs and glitches, making the title screen actually feel appropriate in its glitchiness. In another way, it's sad though. A game that was so popular that a walkthrough of it on YouTube has more than 4.5 million views has been rendered nigh unplayable because one company would rather abandon and kill its software than make that software at least open source so that it could continue to be worked on and utilized. To me, the epitome of this sustained effort to make edgy games with stick figures is the Thing series. Created by Disease Productions, fitting name, the Thing games combine run and gun and platforming elements, though more emphasis is put on the shooting, and a slower pace than most other run and guns is employed. The series spans 9 games, with 4 as a part of the main series and 5 as a part of a spin-off series called Thing Arena. They all embrace this dark emo aesthetic, with environments and characters built almost exclusively out of shades of black, with maybe some red thrown in. I suppose the characters aren't technically stick figures, but they represent the same simple design characteristics that made stick figures so prominent. You're able to customize your character throughout the series, and god is it glorious. The apparel options are drenched in spikes and belts and straps and a whole lot of other Kingdom Hearts bullshit, with equally ostentatious options for hair. Each style is either obscuring the character's eyes, consisting of Sonic the Hedgehog-esque spikes, or made up entirely of some vaguely mature or dark headwear. Seeing these options presented so earnestly is incredibly entertaining, and that only heightens when you consider that you're basically draping this stuff over some weird Rayman stick figure hybrid. Then, of course, there's the plot. You play as Project Number 154, some genetically modified bioweapon who escapes his captivity and tries to search for answers about his origin, in the process battling the corporation that experimented on him, Systems Corp. The narrative plants you in dour city streets, car chases, a desert filled with reanimated corpses, and plenty of labs. Your journey through these locales of course resorts to endless bloody violence, committed with guns that look ridiculous in the character's hands. As for gameplay, there's not that much to say. You really just shoot shit and do some platforming. The weapons feel sufficiently different from one another, and they at least stick out enough to be better suited to different conditions, so switching out weapons and getting to know their properties is encouraged. The preposterous outfits at least make your foes stand out, which is a feat considering the devs seemed averse to using more than 3 colours within an entire game. The AI also generally does a pretty good job of shooting back, so dodging and taking time to get health pickups is necessary for survival. With all this being said, I barely played these games growing up. I distinctly remember their style and tone, but the game itself failed to hold my attention for more than a few minutes. Looking back on it, the gameplay is more thought out than I expected, and the fact that a 4-game series with one continuous narrative got made in the first place is really commendable. But the Thing series will always exist more as a cultural touchstone for this moment and place in time to me, rather than a fun video game. In hindsight, it's easy to rag on these games or cringe over how enthusiastic we used to be about them, but at the end of the day they're still important. That foregone enthusiasm was proof of a real impact being made. These games let kids engage and grapple with darker tones and ideas on their own terms, providing unique experiences and a space to discuss them. The experiences may not have been very well informed on the themes they were touching on, and that lack of oversight I've cited a couple times now probably did some damage as well, but it was all part of a larger sector of gaming that has no doubt been incredibly influential. And so all these edgy, forlorn and over-accessorized games have their place in gaming's history. They shouldn't be forgotten just for being a part of gaming's humorless, factitious adolescent phase, but rather remembered for that very reason. Up until now, I've been talking about these games in groups that share commonalities, but there were plenty of Flash games that I really played as one-offs, just jumping in now and then without exploring further into the space they occupied. First up to bat, or rather putt I guess, is Mini Putt. This one right here? It's Mini Putt alright. You putt and it's certainly mini, I mean god damn it's tiny. How'd I put up with playing a game this small? Well, regardless, I did put up with it over and over. A no-nonsense 18-hole mini golf course with easy to learn controls, hole-in-one solutions for each hole, and a playtime of like 10 minutes makes it so easy and fun to play that it's good for a revisit every couple months, or in my case as a kid, every couple weeks. The next game is a certified classic, providing endless fun by yourself or with friends, at home or at school when the teacher isn't looking. With a wealth of offensive and defensive options, endless tactical considerations, and explosive carnage that wreaks havoc on not just the players, but the environments you play in, the answer to the question of what's the greatest multiplayer Flash game of all time is obviously, unequivocally, tanks! It's tanks, that's... Tanks is the one I'm talking about, it's tanks. It doesn't look like it, but I was not being hyperbolic with my description of tanks. Tanks works off a conceit that's feasible for a Flash game to pull off. Each tank gets a turn to use weapons, move, or use support items like repairing and activating a shield. You mustn't just fight fellow players, but also the topography of the terrain and the winds that gust through it to destroy enemy tanks and emerge victorious. It can be completely controlled by mouse and arrow keys, and although the UI is cluttered, everything has its place, and with no time limit on turns, taking the time to find those places isn't that big an ask. Getting the hang of how the tank feels to shoot and how wind affects projectiles just takes some exposure to those systems. And with such a large arsenal at your disposal, experimentation is always presented as valuable, making the process of learning tanks an exciting one, filled with really great shots and amusing moments of friendly fire. The quickest way to destroy a tank is to hit it directly with a projectile, which will usually blow it up. Weaker hits will deal damage and reduce its maximum power, giving shots that just miss the mark more purpose. If the ground under a tank is obliterated, then the resulting fall will damage the tank as well. The integration of environment is what makes tanks such a diverse experience. The 3 biomes have different characteristics, providing you with a completely flat, shallow desert, rolling hills of the forest, and the harsh inclines and toppling winds of the mountains. Each one favours a different type of battle and engagement from the player, giving rise to different strategies and approaches round to round. Those different tactics are given more weight by the myriad of different weapons. You only start out with 2, the small missile and the volcano bomb. The small missile is out of the question, barely does any damage, completely boring. The volcano bomb splinters out into 5 projectiles, which are also affected by the wind. They're heaps of fun to use and can decimate a tank with a direct hit. You have infinite of the small missile and 100 of the volcano bombs, but that's so many it may as well be infinite, so the small missile never justifies its existence. This becomes a problem when the AI refuses to use the volcano bomb over the small missile, making those games decidedly less engaging. But when you accrue some points and the rest of the arsenal reveals itself, just using those weapons is fun. There's small than large atom bombs, showers which are a spread of explosions, balls which roll along the ground before setting off a massive explosion with a shockwave that follows it, and an airstrike. They each provide tactical advantages, like the balls allowing for more leeway in shots, only having to hit near a target, atom bombs completely removing the ground on a desert map, cutting players off from each other, and showers which have amazing coverage but need time to attain that coverage, making them difficult on mountainous maps. Along the way, they each dole out so much damage that they're amusing to use even if you can't appreciate the roles they fill. That's what makes tanks so great. It's always fun, no matter how deeply you engage with it. How long you engage with it, however, is a different story. You get points to spend in the shop for damaging and destroying tanks. This sets off a snowball effect, where one player does really well, can then afford the best weapons, does well again, and follows this cycle repeatedly, always having a leg up and never having to relinquish control. This can be undone by a concerted effort by other players to focus on the leader, but weapons like the atomic bombs and airstrikes have a magnitude of power that makes it hard to miss with them, so undoing that advantage is always tough. But whenever I played tanks, it was never long enough to fall into that pattern, which is thanks to its flash game roots. And that's what's important. Tanks is a flash game. It works only with a scale and depth that it can manage, bringing laughter and entertainment out of every player, no matter their ability. It knows where to venture further, providing different environments to battle in, and knows when to keep it simple, like the very short rounds and turn-by-turn structure. But most crucially, it was on coolmathgames.com, the one flash game website unlocked on the school computers. So Tanks is a game I sunk endless hours into, but what about one that I have firm memories of, but only negative experiences with? That honour goes to the Yeti Sports series. These are a series of mini-games presented under this Antarctic motif, where you usually play as either a Yeti or penguin to simply get the highest score you can. From what I understand, these were pretty popular, but god did I hate them. They always seem to be based around a played out idea, bringing nothing new to the table and remaining as shallow and thin experiences. Maybe these were games that debuted these ideas, in which case I can understand the popularity. There are 10 of these games and they all look ghastly, absolutely repulsive. It's like someone stitched all of the offcuts from the Donkey Kong Country models and painted them blue and white. They're too detailed for their own good. I mean, just look at the Yeti. It's got these bulging bug eyes that stare endlessly at you, and its hair is thinning in the grossest way possible. I can only imagine how oily and wispy it all is. Ugh. The environments as well. It's just a barren wasteland of endless snow, populated by 2 trees, 1 rock, an ice structure, and the screams of this tortured penguin being swallowed up by the ceaseless sky day in, day out, as this Yeti insists on clubbing it till the end of time. What about a high score based game that works? That comes in the form of Kitten Cannon. By controlling the power and angle of this cannon, you try and shoot a kitten out of it as far as possible, hoping that it's hurled further by traps that cover the ground. It taps into the number go up equal good bit of our brain that we all have, while putting that good old excessive violence that the internet loves front and center. It was certainly more novel when it came out in 2005, or when you're a kid who's seen plenty of violent cartoons, but never the blood or those hijinks would actually splash everywhere. But today, there's no reason to go back to it. In fact, let me give you the only experience with Kitten Cannon you need. There you go, you've seen all it has to offer. The last game we've got to talk about is one that'll likely look familiar even if you've never played it. I'm talking about Crush the Castle. You go level to level using a trebuchet to fire projectiles at structures with the aim of killing all the inhabitants. The game is coded in a medieval look that carries throughout the whole game to create a consistent theme, a theme that feels at home for this type of gameplay. The graphics themselves, I think, look really nice. There's not much personality to it, but that makes it stand in contrast to many Flash games where the stylistic choices can become overbearing and irritating. There's great use of texture, everything having a film of grime and grit that speaks to the callous, coarse time this style comes from. The first few levels ease you into the concept, letting you get your head around using the trebuchet while also seeing how these materials and structures behave when met with different shots. You'll leverage this knowledge to conquer the oncoming challenges before you're met with a new projectile. You first unlock a cluster of 3 stones, giving you an option for a more sustained effort which will topper sturdier, larger structures. While the 3 stones are fun to use, they make the single stone immediately redundant. This is unfortunately a sentiment that carries through much of the game. When you unlock a new projectile, the levels become built around using that projectile until you unlock yet another projectile, the cycle starting anew. The different projectiles all aim to do the exact same thing, destroy structures, so they never fall into unique roles, which leaves Crush the Castle full of unmet potential. There's also what I think is a foundational problem within the mechanics. Literally, the foundations of these structures can never be destroyed. If you make a shot and only half of the structure falls, now that remaining half has been fortified beyond the capabilities of your tools. You have multiple shots on each attempt, but success primarily comes in the form of a single shot that is placed just right. I found it was usually best to just restart a level if I didn't get it first go, which creates a loop of regular failure and occasional success. This doesn't stop the game from being fun, but it sticks out as a disconnect between game mechanics and game structure. The levels stay rather interesting, and the bomb projectiles produce some explosive fun and a natural climax to the game. It's a fun half hour to spend, and once you've spent it, you unlock a level creator. I didn't really make use of it, but I could imagine making a level and having a friend try it would be a good time. I didn't leave Crush the Castle last because it's the best Flash game or anything, but rather because of where it sits in Flash gaming history. On April 28, 2009, Crush the Castle would release as a Flash title. Me and my friends enjoyed messing around with it and had some good fun. Then, in December of 2009, Angry Birds would release on iOS devices and the entire world would enjoy playing it, turning it into one of the most ubiquitous mobile games ever made, and in fact, ubiquitous video game properties ever made. Angry Birds is incredibly similar in concept to Crush the Castle, and its success demonstrated the viability of Flash game concepts on mobile, and the money to be made from them. From that point on, Flash games dwindled in their relevance as mobile gaming became the new market for cheap, casual experiences. This change in the industry would lead us to where gaming sits today, in a strange contradiction of massive $100 million plus games being drowned in manipulative monetization and indie games made by small teams on small budgets that give you exactly what you pay for. Flash gaming has had an impression upon both sides of this coin. There's a clear logical line to be drawn from the short play sessions and numbers-fueled gameplay that many Flash games employed to the free-to-play mobile games with exceedingly bare premises and a live system that doesn't even let you play for very long, unless you pay for it. Both of these games would also be surrounded by ads. In a mobile game, it's between levels or to get an extra life. On a Flash game, it was on the website it was hosted on, ads plastered on almost any unfilled space. But at the same time, we can see how Flash gaming influenced the indie space, being pretty much only comprised of indie games itself, but also planting the seeds of experimentation and unique character that the indie game scene sows today. Some of the most thriving indie game spaces like itch.io resemble Flash game sites, being able to read descriptions of games that were clearly written by the one person who made it. Looking back at Flash games like this has been a fantastic time, and an interesting one as well. Some of these games are just as fun as I remember, and some maybe mourn the hours of time I spent on them as a child, but they're all a part of a movement in gaming that has been unspeakably influential and important to not just people who play games, but also the people and companies that make them. And knowing this makes the total disregard for their preservation all the more frustrating. With Flash abandoned by Adobe, thousands of creations are liable to dissolve and disappear. Although there hasn't been much of an effort on the industry side, Groups and people on the internet are doing what they can to keep these parts of history playable. A big one is Flashpoint, having archived over 90,000 games and 10,000 animations since September of 2018. It's free to download and acts as a launcher, so don't worry, that download doesn't come with all 90,000 games necessarily. You can simply install and run the ones you want through Flashpoint. Even the Mac version that's still in beta and hasn't been updated for quite a while, which I used, still got every game I wanted to run, with most of them being completely playable. Then there's Ruffle, a Flash emulator that you can add as a browser extension or use as a standalone piece of software, letting you play Flash games on the web again. There's also a few more official options out there. Ninja Kiwi, the devs of the Bloons games, have the Ninja Kiwi archive available to download on their website, letting you play a bunch of their games on your computer. And Wix, the maker of the Duck Life series, has their games available to play on their site for free. I encourage you all to use the above mentioned resources to go back and play some of your favourite Flash games. There's tons of nostalgia and good memories ready to be rediscovered there, and you may even find something new that you like as well. Thank you to everyone who helped create and host the games that were such an integral part of my childhood. Thank you to everyone putting in the time to preserve these experiences, and thank you to you for watching.